They said I wasn't on the list. Not in anger, not even in shame. Just a cold glance from the funeral coordinator as she checked her clipboard and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your name's not here. This list is family only." I stood there with my military ID in one hand and my father's folded flag in the other. The same flag I'd once dragged through a sandstorm in the Korengal Valley, while his son, my brother, was giving interviews about his tech startup. Funny, isn't it? I've led men into black zones. I've debriefed CIA directors and intercepted threats that never made the news. But my own family didn't think I was worth a seat in the second pew of a funeral they only had because I paid for it in silence. You ever stood at the gates of your own family's pride and been told, "You don't belong"? The guard didn't stop me. He saluted me. That was the irony. The uniform I wore was recognized everywhere, except inside that chapel. The air that morning smelled like salt and lemon wood. A clean sort of morning. My heels clicked against the marble, each step deliberate, each breath a command. The Virginia sunlight dappled through the stained glass saints, all blue and gold, as if heaven was trying to remember who I was when the living would not. I could see them already. My mother in her navy suit, my brother Ethan in a crisp gray tie, his wife Lily beside him, the perfect couple who once told me I was too aggressive to be loved. Behind them sat the same neighbors who used to tell me I must be so lonely in the military. And yet, none of them saw me when I entered. They weren't looking, because they didn't expect me, because they didn't invite me. The program said, "In loving memory of Richard Monroe." My father, retired Navy commander, Vietnam veteran. It listed his children, Ethan Monroe and no one else. They rewrote the family tree, like I'd been a fever they sweated out in adolescence. A phase, a misfire, a daughter they once had. Have you ever seen your name missing from a document that's supposed to immortalize blood? I sat at the back, alone, because I was taught to sit with my back to the wall, eyes on exits, ears on murmurs, a habit I couldn't drop, even in grief. The eulogies began. Ethan stepped up first. He talked about how Dad taught him discipline, how he respected the chain of command, how he carried the family name with honor. I smiled, because Ethan had once dropped out of ROTC after 2 weeks, because he never served a day in uniform, because I remember the time Dad screamed at him for failing a physics exam, and he ran to me, sobbing, and I told him, "You can still rebuild." He forgot that day, conveniently. Then came Lily. My father-in-law always said women were the heart of the home. She smiled, her pearl earrings catching the light. He loved my apple pie and said I reminded him of Mom. I wondered if she'd ever sat with him while he coughed blood into white towels. I had. I remembered the way his fingers grasped for mine in the VA hospital, muttering, "Ellie, you're the one with the spine." But that memory wasn't part of the program. It wasn't the insult that broke me. It was the silence. When my name was never called. When no one turned their head to check if I was here. When no one said, "Where's Elena?" That's what made it feel like a second burial. My father deserved better. So I stood. I walked down the aisle, boots clicking like a slow drumbeat. People turned. Whispers. A few gasps. Because I wasn't in black. I was in uniform. Service dress blue. Full medals. Rank colonel. I stopped in front of the flag-draped coffin. Saluted. Let the silence stretch. Then I spoke. "Commander Richard Monroe did not raise a son who served," I said, facing the crowd. "But he did raise a daughter who did." And I turned away before they could clap, or murmur, or cry, because I didn't come for their redemption. I came to return the flag. Back in the foyer, the funeral coordinator approached, now pale. "Ma'am, Colonel Monroe." I had no idea. "You don't need to," I said. Just next time, don't assume the soldier has to be a man. Have you ever seen an entire room shrink without a sound? Have you felt their eyes try to glue your shadow back into their family portrait? I didn't need them to include me anymore, because the nation already had. Outside, a motorcade pulled up, black SUVs, a defense secretary's flag fluttering. They stepped out. Not for my father, but for me. One of the aides nodded to the chapel. They didn't list you. I shook my head. I was never meant to be here. But I came anyway. The defense secretary himself stepped forward. Tall, silver hair. He saluted. "Welcome, Colonel Monroe," he said, loud enough for the doors to hear. And just like that, the hierarchy reversed. The ignored daughter became the only one addressed. I didn't answer him right away. It wasn't because I didn't know what to say. I always know what to say. It was because I needed to feel the weight of that moment settle into my bones before I moved again. Because for the first time in decades, I wasn't reporting in. I wasn't briefing. I wasn't translating the language of threat matrices for men who still assumed I got here by accident. I was simply being seen. You know that look, don't you? The one where someone suddenly realizes they've misjudged you not a little, but entirely. As if your whole life had been lived just beyond their imagination. That's how Ethan looked when the doors opened and the defense secretary extended his hand to me. "Elena Monroe," he said again, louder this time. "Colonel, we're grateful you're here." My brother's face was a marble sketch of confusion and dread. His lips parted slightly, searching for a script he hadn't rehearsed. Lily clutched his arm, her expression trying to rearrange itself into something resembling respect, but falling short. And my mother. She didn't stand. She didn't smile. She simply stared, like someone seeing a ghost take form. It was a silence far colder than rejection. It was the silence of someone who knows they can no longer pretend you don't exist. I didn't look at them long. I wasn't there for a family reunion. I turned to the secretary. "Sir, with respect, I didn't come for appearances." He smiled faintly. Neither did I. We stepped aside, away from the chapel doors. The aides and officers stood a few paces back, sensing that what needed to happen wasn't official, it was personal. He lowered his voice. "I served with your father. Not directly, but I knew his record. He spoke about you. You know." I didn't breathe. Not yet. He told a story once, over cheap bourbon at a Navy retirement event. Said he had a daughter who could outshoot most of the men on his base. Said she built a language of silence, that you learned how to vanish and strike from nowhere. My throat tightened. He never said those things to me. I imagine he didn't know how, the secretary said, with a strange kind of sadness. He glanced at the flag folded in my arms. "That's yours." "No," I said quietly. "It's his." But even as I said it, I felt the fabric as something else now. Not just a ceremonial triangle, not just the symbol they handed to widows and orphans. It was proof that I had served, that I had bled, that I had stood for something that could not be edited out of a funeral program. "Walk with me," he asked. So I did. We stepped out onto the lawn, the sun striking my ribbons in a blaze of red, blue, and bronze. The crowd inside murmured. I could feel their eyes pressing against the stained glass. "You came in from Germany, didn't you?" he asked. I nodded. "Berlin. Task Force Vega. You're still running Vega Commanding. Temporarily." A slow grin formed. That's a hell of a post for someone they left off a guest list. I didn't smile. Not yet. Not when it still hurt. "It wasn't a mistake," I said. "They've been doing it for years, skipping my name, leaving me out of photos, telling friends I moved around too much to keep up with. It started small, but silence grows." "You let them?" he asked. Now I looked at him. You think letting them erase me was passive? His face straightened. I let them think I was gone, I said, so I could build something they couldn't reach. That's what they never understood. Not my mother, not Ethan, not the well-meaning neighbors with casseroles and hollow eyes. They thought my silence meant defeat. They never realized it was discipline. Have you ever had to disappear so thoroughly from someone's life, just to hear yourself think, when I joined Naval Intelligence, I stopped calling. When I moved into cyber ops, I stopped writing. When I made Colonel, I didn't send a single announcement. No framed certificate. No Christmas update. They didn't want me in the family. So I left it. But I didn't disappear. I just built something bigger than their house of shame. Back inside, the funeral resumed without me. The priest spoke in gentle platitudes. My brother gave his second tribute. The slideshow rolled, photos of Dad fishing, laughing, holding Ethan's firstborn. Not a single photo of me, not even one of Dad in uniform with me as a girl, clutching his leg at a change of command ceremony. I remember that day. I wore white patent shoes. He wore his dress whites. He said I stood so straight he thought I was made of glass. Gone. All of it. As if I had been erased frame by frame. The secretary placed a hand on my shoulder. You don't need their validation. I know. But it hurts anyway. Yes. We stood in silence. Then he said something I didn't expect. We've shortlisted you for an advanced command restructure, backdoor approval from the Joint Chiefs. It's not public yet. I blinked. Why tell me here? Because sometimes the most private pain prepares you for the most public role. I felt the weight of those words. Not pride, not ambition. Just the strange calm that comes when every door they locked suddenly opens and you realize you no longer need to walk through them. You build your own. A young ensign approached. Hesitant. Colonel Monroe, someone inside would like to speak with you. I already knew who. I turned my head just slightly. There he was. Ethan, standing in the doorway, hands at his side, shoulders squared like he was still pretending to be the man Dad wanted. But he wasn't speaking. Not yet. He looked at the flag in my hands, then at the secretary, then back to me. He opened his mouth, and nothing came out. Because how do you speak to the woman you erased, when the world just saluted her? Because how do you apologize in a language you never bothered to learn? I walked toward him, each step silent, each step reclaiming something. I stopped inches from him. He whispered, I didn't know they left you off. I said nothing. He tried again. We thought you were too busy, too far. I never what? My voice was ice. You never came home. I held his gaze. This is my home, I said. It always was. You just boarded it up when I went to war. He looked down, and I let the silence be my closing argument. He didn't follow me when I turned away. Not this time. I stepped back onto the gravel path outside the chapel, where petals from a nearby dogwood tree drifted through the air like ash that had forgotten how to burn. My boots crushed them as I passed. Steady. Final. It was the first sound I truly heard that day, not the prayers, not the hymns, not Ethan's trembling voice, just the crunch of steps that no one else could take for me. Sometimes, it's not the words they withhold that haunt you. It's the ones you withhold back for too long, for too many years, until they begin to clot behind your ribs like shrapnel you pretend isn't there. But I didn't bleed today. Not for them. The sun was shifting now, tilting westward. The chapel cast long shadows across the flagstones like veins in the earth, dark lines trailing from where I stood to the door where my mother now appeared. She stood beneath the stone arch, one hand resting on the wrought iron frame, her other arm crossed tightly across her chest. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished, somehow not by age, but by something else. Something harder to name. Guilt. Maybe. Or the slow erosion of a woman who had spent her life polishing a version of reality so clean that it cut. She didn't wave. She didn't call my name. Just looked. As if seeing me now meant rewriting every judgment she'd ever whispered to her church friends, every phone call she'd screened, every photo of mine she had removed from the family wall without ceremony. Have you ever watched your own mother try to calculate the distance between her love and your survival? She wanted to speak. I could feel it, the muscles in her jaw working, the shallow rise and fall of her breath. But she said nothing. Because what could she say? I'm proud of you. Too late. I didn't know she did. You've changed. No, I've simply come into focus. She stepped forward once, then stopped. And that, more than anything, told me we were no longer playing the same game, because mothers, real mothers, run to their daughters when they see pain. They don't wait for a press release from the Department of Defense to validate their child's worth. She had chosen silence, over and over again, and now, that silence was all she had left to offer. The secretary's aide reappeared at my side. Polite, unintrusive. Colonel Monroe, the convoy is ready whenever you are. I nodded, but my eyes stayed on her. She was still frozen, one heel forward, one behind the stance of someone caught between two worlds, neither of which will welcome her. I didn't lift my hand to wave goodbye. Instead, I turned toward the convoy. The doors were open. The American flag on the antenna flapped softly in the breeze, and for a moment, I remembered the last time I rode in a vehicle like this. It was overseas. Kandahar. One of our own had been taken out by an IED. I rode back with his effects. His wedding ring in a Ziploc bag. A photo of his daughter smeared with blood and sand. He was 27. The job had no room for ceremony. But I made space anyway. Because grief is a battlefield too. And I'd learned how to walk it. We pulled away from the chapel. The image in the rear view was perfectly framed, my mother at the threshold. Ethan still just inside. The chapel flag at half-mast. A frozen portrait of the family that tried to unwrite me. I let it shrink into the distance. Ma'am, the aide said gently, you've been asked to debrief the Pentagon tomorrow morning. The secretary wants to fast-track the leadership transition for Vega. Copy that, I replied, my voice steady, professional, the rhythm of command falling back into place like muscle memory. But inside, there was still noise. Not chaos, not doubt. Something quieter. Like the aftermath of an airstrike, the dust just beginning to settle. The silence that feels like the truest sound you'll ever hear. The car curved onto the main road. Miles of green stretched ahead. For the first time in days. I unclenched my jaw. Have you ever carried a weight so long that you forgot it was never yours? I used to think I had to earn my place in their world. That, if I just brought back one more medal, survived one more op, got one more commendation maybe, then they'd see me. Maybe then I'd be enough. But what I learned, what today etched into my bones, was this. You do not need to be understood to be valid. You do not need a seat at their table if you command your own room. You do not need their permission to exist. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad. I was. But because the tears weren't for them anymore. They were for the girl I used to be. The one who sat alone at school recitals while her brother's name got thunderous applause. The one who was called difficult because she asked too many questions. The one who was told by her father, half drunk, half proud, you'd have made a fine son. I never wanted to be a son. I just wanted to be seen as enough. The car passed a military checkpoint. The guard saluted. I returned it instinctively, the motion crisp and quiet. That's the thing about military protocol. It doesn't care about your mother's opinion. It doesn't remember your high school nickname. It sees the rank, the record, the reality. And in that space, I had built a truth no one could erase. Back at the hotel, I entered my suite without turning on the light. Let the dusk settle in through the window. The flag still sat in my hands. I placed it gently on the desk, beside the telegram I never sent and the photo I never mailed. It was me and Dad, the last one before I deployed. He wasn't smiling, but he was holding my hand. That alone was enough. I picked up a pen. I didn't write a letter. I just wrote a name. My name, Colonel Elena Monroe. Not for them. For me. That night. I didn't sleep. Not from grief. Not from jet lag. From something heavier. Quieter, the kind of wakefulness that comes when your body knows something has ended, but your mind hasn't caught up yet. The suite was silent, dimly lit by the city's faint reflections. I left the curtains open. Outside, headlights moved across the glass like ghosts, soft, fleeting. I sat at the desk, the folded flag beside me, the old photo in front of me, and a blank piece of paper between. I had written my name. That was all. But for some reason, it felt like enough. No rank, no salutation, no summary of service, just the name they tried to erase written by my own hand, on my own terms. Have you ever stared at your own name and realized no one else has ever said it without wanting something, a favor, a sacrifice, an apology, or worse, permission? My name was the one thing they never learned how to honor. They loved Ethan's name. They used it like currency. Ethan got into Stanford. Ethan's company just got funding. Ethan and Lily are trying for another baby. But my name, Elena, it got tucked away into footnotes, whispered, never worn out loud. A name spoken only when they needed someone to fly home and sign the hospice forms, or to pay for things without being thanked. And I had done it. Every time. Until I didn't. That was the real betrayal. Wasn't it? I didn't walk away angry. I didn't scream. I didn't demand to be seen. I simply stopped showing up. And somehow, that was worse. Because silence, when chosen, becomes power. And power terrifies the ones who only knew how to control you through need. There's a loneliness that comes with that, but there's also peace. I poured myself a glass of water. No scotch tonight. I wanted to feel everything, not dull it, not reframe it, just sit in the rawness of this strange freedom. The phone buzzed. One new message. Ethan. I stared at it for a moment. I knew it before I opened it. Some too late attempt at grace, a digital fig leaf. It read, I didn't know what to say today. I still don't. But you looked powerful. I put the phone down without answering, not out of spite, but because I didn't need the compliment. I needed the childhood he helped erase. I walked to the window, barefoot now. The cold tile grounded me. Have you ever had a moment where you could finally exhale, but didn't want to? Because the silence that follows might hurt more than the noise. That's what this was, the ache of being done. I thought about my mother, still in that chapel dress, probably sitting on the edge of her guest room bed, still trying to find the words she refused to speak when I stood 10 feet away. Would she ever say them? I'm sorry. You mattered. You did good. Elena, maybe not. But I wouldn't wait anymore. Not for her. Not for Ethan. Not for any of them. I turned back to the desk, picked up the pen, and began to write something else, not for command, not for the press. For myself, a timeline, not of battles, but of every time I was overlooked and kept going anyway. Age 8, recited the pledge louder than the boys. Teacher called me disruptive. Age 12, built my first circuit board from scrap. Dad said, don't waste your time with that. Age 17, top of my class. No one came to the awards dinner. Age 19, first time in a flight simulator. Outperformed 2 cadets, instructor said. Impressive. For a girl. Age 25, first deployment, first classified brief, first time my name was redacted from credit. Age 31, promoted to lieutenant colonel, sent the news to mom. No reply. Age 34, turned down a public-facing post to take command of Vega Silent Excellence. No headline. Age 39, called to brief the Joint Chiefs. Ethan sent a photo of his new pool that same day. No mention of my work. Today, Defense Secretary addressed me as Colonel Monroe in front of my family. I set the pen down again. Sometimes, the record you need isn't the one written in ink. It's the one you feel in your spine, the one your scars remember better than your tongue. And sometimes, your victories are invisible to the very people who raised you because they taught you to hide the parts they were too small to understand. I've stopped hiding. The bedside clock blinked 02:37. I should have slept. I had a flight in the morning, a briefing folder I hadn't even opened yet, and a mind still looping fragments of voices I never asked to remember. But then a knock. Soft, uncertain. 3 slow taps. I froze. No one knew my room number. Not the aides. Not even the hotel staff the secretary had booked me under a pseudonym. Another knock. I approached the door in silence, checked the peephole. It was my mother. Alone. No coat. Just the same navy dress. Slightly wrinkled now. Her lipstick faded. One earring missing. I didn't open the door right away, because I needed to decide, was I the daughter she remembered, or was I the woman she had erased? Or could I finally be neither? I opened the door. We stared at each other. She didn't cry. She never did. That wasn't her way. But she looked at me the way a person looks at an ocean they're seeing for the first time, reverent, afraid, and suddenly aware of how small they are. Elena, she said. Just that. I let the silence answer her for a few seconds longer than comfort allowed. Then I stepped aside. She entered slowly, her heels echoing on the tile like a confession. We didn't hug, we didn't sit. We just stood there, 2 women with too many words between them. I saw you, she whispered. Up there. I said nothing. You look like your father. I flinched. No, she corrected herself. You look like something he never had the courage to be. Still, I said nothing. She lowered her gaze. We didn't know how to handle you. You always were too much, I said, quietly. She nodded. Or too different. You didn't need us the way Ethan did. That doesn't mean I didn't want to be loved. That stopped her. For a moment, I saw the girl she used to be. Scared, guarded, groomed into silence by a generation that thought obedience was dignity. I didn't know how. She finally said. I believed her. That didn't mean I forgave her. But belief was a beginning. I don't expect anything from you. I said. I just expect space. Space to exist, without needing to be translated. She nodded. Do you want the flag, I asked? Her eyes filled not tears. Not quite. Just something watery and raw. No, she whispered. You earned it. You kept him alive longer than any of us did. And with that, she turned to leave. No drama, no hug, just the faintest nod acknowledgement. Perhaps, or the beginning of one. As the door clicked shut behind her, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Not closure, not healing, but the end of something, and the beginning of everything else. The next morning came quietly. No trumpet of revelation, no dramatic sunrise, just the soft hush of rain against the windows like the sky was washing away what the night couldn't reach. The world didn't look changed, but I was. I rose early, still in uniform from the night before. The ribbons on my chest were slightly crooked from leaning against the desk, but I didn't fix them. There was something poetic in the imperfection, as if the fabric remembered what the heart had endured. I stared at myself in the mirror. Have you ever looked at your own reflection and seen both the child they broke and the woman who walked away from the wreckage? There were traces of both this morning. My hair was pinned back with military precision. My eyes were unreadable, just like I'd trained them to be, but something new lingered behind them. Not pride, not grief, not revenge. Freedom. Not the kind they hand you in speeches or wave like a flag, the kind you take back, inch by inch, until you can breathe again. I folded the flag carefully and placed it back into the case. I didn't need to carry it into the Pentagon. Today wasn't about mourning. Today was about command. The car arrived precisely at 0700. Black sedan, tinted windows, silent driver. I slid into the back seat and closed the door before the aide could reach for the handle. No need for protocol now. I was done performing gratitude. We cut through the city with ease, early traffic just beginning to stir. My phone buzzed once a calendar alert. 0730 briefing with Defense Secretary Operation Vega Reorientation. My fingers hovered over the screen. I dismissed the alert, because I didn't need to be reminded. I had carried that operation through 3 reorganizations, 2 underfunded quarters, and 1 near dismantlement. When Vega was reduced to low priority, I didn't flinch. I fought. Quietly. Persistently. Like a woman who knew her weapons weren't loud, they were accurate. At the gate, the guards saluted. The first one recognized me and straightened his posture like his spine remembered something his mouth couldn't say. Colonel Monroe. Ma'am. Morning. Sergeant. We passed through. Inside, the air was clinical. Sanitized ambition. The walls whispered history portraits of men in medals, women few and far between. The halls always smelled faintly of coffee, printer ink, and tension. The secretary's office was on the top floor. I entered the secure elevator. Alone. The mirrored walls surrounded me, reflecting a dozen versions of myself. Have you ever stood between who you were told to be and who you became, and realized you owe nothing to either? I straightened slightly, not out of insecurity, but because I was remembering my posture, the posture of someone who doesn't apologize for space. The doors opened. The receptionist nodded, typed something quickly, and waved me in. Colonel Monroe, they're expecting you. I entered the room. It wasn't large, but it was heavy. Heavy with power. Heavy with eyes. The secretary stood near the window, flanked by 2 generals and 1 civilian strategist whose face I recognized from the briefings he never invited me to. This time, he stood. They all did. Colonel, the secretary said. Welcome back. I nodded once. Sir. No need for formality today, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. We're here to talk about leadership. And legacies. I sat, slow and deliberate. We've reviewed Vega's trajectory. One of the generals began. It's clear it never should have been sidelined. That's on us. But your command performance has been beyond what we had a right to expect. The secretary finished. I didn't blink. They were apologizing without saying the word. I had seen it before, power correcting itself with careful grace. But that didn't mean I would bow. You want to reactivate Vega? I asked. We want to elevate it, he replied. Task Force Vega will be integrated into the Strategic Threat Response Command. You'll be operating out of Ramstein, with full NATO access. And command? I asked. All yours. I felt the air shift. Not in the room inside me. I'd fought for this for years, sacrificed for it, been bypassed, belittled, misfiled under support role while running operations that made men famous. And now, they were handing it to me. But they didn't understand. I wasn't here to accept it. I was here to define it. I'll need 3 things. I said evenly. The secretary raised an eyebrow. Name them. full operational autonomy on asset selection, no political filters. Approved. 5-year funding guarantee, no annual review panels. Risky, but necessary. He glanced at the civilian strategist. The man nodded reluctantly. Fine. Done. And third, I looked at them each in turn. A woman will follow me. When I step down, I want a pipeline created not one woman, a generation. They went quiet. You know that silence. It's the sound of men recalibrating the future around someone they didn't plan for. Finally, the secretary spoke. You'll write the manual. I stood. No, sir. I'll burn the old one. He smiled then, not with arrogance, with relief. Welcome to command, Colonel Monroe. I saluted. He returned it. Meeting over, back in the corridor. I walked past the portraits again. This time, I paused. There was a blank frame on the wall, a placeholder for the next, a space waiting. Have you ever seen an empty frame and known, without question, that it was already yours? I didn't need to pose for it. I didn't need them to sculpt my legacy. I would carve it myself. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were parting, not dramatically, but with slow ceremony the way curtains open in an old theater before the first light hits center stage. The driver opened the car door. Where to? Ma'am. I didn't answer right away, because there was no longer one place I had to be. There was the world. I pulled out my phone, scrolled past Ethan's unread message, past the photos Lily had sent of her kids, past the group thread that hadn't included me in years, and I opened a new message. To myself. Subject forward. I typed one line: you were never on their list because you were never theirs to define. I hit send. As the car pulled away from the Pentagon, I felt it for the first time. Not just respect, not just recognition, but release. Not from duty, not from grief, from the illusion that their love had ever been the measure of my worth. The car wound through Arlington's silent streets, where wet pavement reflected the morning like a truth it couldn't hide. Buildings passed, but I barely registered them. I wasn't seeing roads anymore. I was seeing the long corridor of my life, door after door where I had knocked and no one had answered. Until I stopped knocking. Until I built my own corridor. Have you ever reached a moment so quiet, so complete? It no longer felt like triumph, only stillness. That's what this was. The noise had ended. Not around me, inside me. I leaned my head back against the seat, closed my eyes, and let the silence wrap around my ribs like armor that didn't have to shine. The driver's voice cut in softly. Colonel, we've arrived. I opened my eyes. Not a base, not a command center. A small cafe tucked between government buildings, the kind that served real coffee and no pretense. The kind I used to sit outside when I needed to remember that I was still human. I'll be 15, I said. He nodded and stayed behind. Inside. The place hadn't changed. Mismatched chairs, faded photos of soldiers taped to the wall, a chalkboard menu with a smudge across banana bread that never got fixed. The girl at the counter looked up, saw the uniform, and straightened. Ma'am, just a black coffee. To go. As she poured, I walked to the wall of photos. Most were old, curling at the edges, men in fatigues, women with tired smiles. One photo caught my eye, a woman younger than me in full gear, crouched in a field with a child clinging to her back. No name written beneath. I took a sticky note from the register, wrote one. Captain Leah Hart. Ramadi, 2006. I didn't know if it was her, but it didn't matter. Every woman erased deserved a name. My coffee was ready. I turned to go and nearly bumped into someone. He wore civilian clothes, blue button-down, no tie, But his stance, his haircut, the angle of his jaw, I knew his kind before he even spoke. Colonel Monroe. Yes. He extended a hand. David Lang. State Department. I raised an eyebrow. Don't worry, he said quickly. This isn't official. I was at the Pentagon this morning. I heard the secretary's debrief. Vega's elevation caught a lot of ears. I'm sure. We've been tracking your work from a distance. You've done more with fewer resources than entire agencies. I said nothing. I'd learned long ago that silence makes men explain themselves faster. We're proposing a joint task force. Not just NATO. Civilian integrated intel, cross-continent field deployments. You'd lead. Why me? Because you're already doing it. I sipped my coffee. Bitter. Just the way I liked it. And we'll send a formal offer. But I wanted to look you in the eye first. See if you're real. I met his gaze. Held it. Let him see every storm behind mine. I'm real. I said. That's what makes me dangerous. He smiled nervously. Stepped aside. I left the cafe. Back in the car. I didn't speak. Just watched the Capitol dome drift into view, half shrouded in mist. I thought about my father, the medals he wore, the ones they buried him with, the ones I'd surpassed but never showed him. Would he have been proud I used to ask that? Now I ask, would he have listened, because pride without presence is noise. The car slowed again. The driver turned. Ma'am, you have a visitor waiting at the hotel, he insisted. I sighed. Who? He handed me a card. Ethan Monroe. I closed my eyes, just for a second, then nodded. Take me around the block. I'll walk in alone. When we arrived, I stepped out slowly, deliberately. Each step on the pavement reminded me I didn't owe him anything, but maybe I owed the unfinished sentence. He stood in the lobby, same gray coat from the funeral, tie loosened now, hair damp from the drizzle. For once, he didn't look curated, just human. Ilona, he said. I said nothing. I came because he began, then stopped. Started again. I don't know where to begin. Then don't. I said. Don't begin. Just speak. He swallowed. Looked at the floor, then back at me. I erased you. My chest tightened, not from shock, from the relief of hearing him say it. I didn't know how to share space with you. You were always so far ahead. You didn't need anyone. That's a lie you told yourself so you wouldn't have to need me, I said. He nodded. Yes. I told myself you abandoned the family, but the truth is, I couldn't stand watching you succeed where I'd failed. I folded my arms. And now I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I see you now. I paused, then leaned in just slightly. Do you see me, Ethan? Or do you see the uniform? The salutes? The version of me that finally outranks your shame? He flinched. I let him sit with it, because discomfort is the tax of realization. I was wrong, he whispered. About everything? I know. Silence. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a photo. Old. Weathered. The three of us. Him. Me. Dad. At the docks. I was maybe 9, clutching a fishing rod twice my height. Smiling. I found this in Dad's drawer after he died. He said, he kept it. The one with you. My throat burned. He extended it to me. I didn't take it. I don't need proof. I said, I have my memory. He nodded slowly. Then, goodbye. Elena. He turned and walked out the door. This time, I didn't watch him go, because I didn't need the ending. I already had the beginning. Back upstairs. I placed the empty coffee cup beside the flag. I looked out the window. The city moved as if nothing had changed. But everything had. They had tried to write me out of the story. Now I was the story. Not for revenge. Not for applause. but because silence, wielded with purpose, becomes legacy. And mine had just begun. That evening, I walked the perimeter of the reflecting pool in silence. No detail team, no clipboard aide trailing behind me, no sound but my own boots pressing into the gravel path. I wasn't hiding, and I wasn't posing. I was simply there. The Capitol glowed behind me, the Lincoln Memorial ahead, and in between my shadow stretching across stone and still water, as if my body were finally long enough to hold everything I'd carried for decades. The wind was cool. My hair moved just slightly under my cap. To the tourists I passed, I was just another officer in dress blues. They didn't know what this day had taken, or what it had given back. And maybe that was the final blessing. Because when no one recognizes the war you've survived, you're free to define your own peace. I sat on a bench across from the World War II memorial. No camera crews, no ceremonies. Just light flickering on granite and silence between fountains. It reminded me of Dad. I used to sit beside him in the evenings, after his voice had gone hoarse from shouting, after the bourbon had taken hold, when the house was quiet and he forgot to pretend. One time, I asked, "Were you afraid over there?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "Yes." But the fear was quiet. The pride was louder. That's what got me home. I never forgot that. But I also never told him I brought the fear with me, and the pride came later. In war, I had no name but rank. In family, I had no rank at all. I lived in the crack between them, long enough to build something neither could claim. The defense secretary had offered me more than a post this morning. He offered me ownership of something they never intended me to inherit. A legacy. And still, part of me resisted it. Because power wasn't what I wanted. It never was. I just wanted a seat at the table I was born into until I realized the table was never built for me. And when I stopped waiting for a chair, I discovered something no one expected. I could build the whole damn room. You ever have that moment when you realize you don't want their apology because it would only reduce the scale of what you've become? That's why I didn't take Ethan's photograph. That's why I didn't cry when my mother left. Because in the end, their recognition would have only narrowed my existence back down to the version they could live with, and I will never shrink again. The wind shifted. I smelled rain coming. I didn't move. I remembered the names they forgot to say at the funeral. Mine, and so many others. Women who served, women who bled, women who went unseen and unloved, and still showed up because excellence was never about visibility. It was about refusal. Refusal to be erased. Refusal to be silenced. Refusal to settle for a legacy written in someone else's ink. Have you ever looked at your own life like a mission map full of redacted paths and shadow operations, and realized it was a masterpiece only you could read? That was me now. Unreadable to them, undeniable to history, a woman shaped by absence, not defined by it. I rose and walked toward the memorial. The marble felt cold beneath my fingertips. I pressed my hand against a name I didn't know, but still felt bound to. We all wear the same silence eventually. Behind me, footsteps. I didn't turn. A woman's voice. Soft, precise. Colonel Monroe. I turned. She was younger than me. Civilian clothes. No makeup. Short hair. Steady eyes. She held a folder. "I'm with Joint Strategic Operations. Under Secretary Lang." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't look like Lang's people." "I'm not," she said. "But he trusts me. And he said you would too." She handed me the folder. "Consider this your unofficial first briefing," she said. I took it. Unclasped the cover. Inside maps. Intercepted intel. Logistics. At the top, Operation Persid Command Recommendation Monroe. E. Another task force. Bigger. Deeper. Off the books. She said. But not invisible. Not anymore. And why me? She smiled, not with flattery, with understanding. Because you're the one they can't ignore anymore, and because the women coming next need to see someone who didn't just break the ceiling, she melted the foundation. I didn't answer. I just nodded once. She saluted. I returned it. Then she was gone. Left with nothing but the folder in my hand and the whole of history pressing against my back like wind. I walked. Back to the hotel. Back to the room that smelled like old fabric and newer choices. I placed the folder on the desk, next to the flag, next to the photo I never mailed and the name I wrote only for myself. And then I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I called my grandmother's old number, the one my mother disconnected years ago. The voicemail still worked. It said, "This is Monroe. You know what to do." I left a message. For no one. For me. I was never on your list. I said, but I'm on the next one. I hung up. And I smiled. Not the smile of victory, not the grin of vengeance. Something quieter, wiser. The smile of someone who found her voice not in speaking louder, but in needing no answer. I stepped out onto the balcony. The city was fading into fog. Lights blinked. Cars passed. Power flowed. And there I stood, not demanding anything, just being Colonel Elena Monroe, unwritten, unshakable, unforgotten.